I know that you shifted it for the people in Silicon Valley, but I'm wondering, is there a lot of people who want it moved back, or is this just a minority?
A minority. But all inputs are valuable. I definitely take that to heart, and we will see. We're constantly optimizing, like a startup does. You got to, so if others message, we'll keep playing with the times and see what works best. So
Thanks,
we got, yeah, but thank you. I appreciate the comment, and it's definitely in my mind, in the endless balance of trying to figure out the optimum time for everybody. So, someone named James has a hand up, so let's go ahead and
Tyler.
see. Yes, Cheryl.
I just got back onto CupDat.
Okay, good. Here we go. I'm ready. If you're ready, I'm ready.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. Welcome, James.
Thank you. Is it Tyler? Yeah.
Yes.
Tyler, I have a little question about JAWS for Windows. I don't know if you've noticed it, but sometimes JAWS for Windows doesn't respond when you want to turn the voice assistant off when you're on web pages and stuff like that. A lot of people have had a problem with that.
Okay. Good to know. And I see James in the audience. Maybe we can promote some Antler stuff here. We could talk about some LA stuff going on. Let's see where the headlines are. I haven't even looked at the news yet myself today, so it's going to be a fresh surprise for me. Cheryl, are you ready? I'm ready.
Yes, I need a green bean in CupDat.
Okay, let's make sure Cheryl's the mod on stage. There you go. And here comes your favorite sound. Now it's official. Here we go.
Let's do
The
this.
top story today is from a security story. That's never good. It says a vulnerability in the Apache log4j Java logging library allows for remote code execution, impacting, just a couple of things like Steam, which is where all the video games are being played, iCloud, where everything on your Apple account, Minecraft. It's just a little game that, a billion kids are playing, and other services. So a few hours ago, a zero-day exploit in the popular Java logging library, log4j, was tweeted along with a POC posted on GitHub that results in what? Let's find out. And if we haven't already, let's ping in Jonathan Data and see if he knows something about this, which no doubt he will. And Jonathan Data, let's see. This is the magic of Clubhouse, is we get to ping in people who are likely to know more about this than we do. And this would be a great example. But I don't know what his Clubhouse username is.
I'll pin him.
JT.
No, I found it. Here we go.
I thought it was Data.
I just pinged him in Clubhouse. So let's keep your eye out for Jonathan Data with the black hat to hop on stage here in a second, because no doubt he will be able to shed additional light on this in a way that no one else can. That's kind of
just to clarify. I don't think he's a black hat.
No, nor do I. But I mean, in his photo, in his avatar for Clubhouse, he's wearing a black hat. So it says, a few hours ago, a zero-day exploit in the popular Java logging library was discovered that results in a remote code execution by logging a certain string. Given how ubiquitous this library is, the impact of the exploit, which would be full server control, and how easy it is to exploit, the impact of this vulnerability is quite severe. We're calling it log4shell for short. The zero-day was tweeted along with a POC posted on GitHub that has been published, and this post provides resources to help you understand the vulnerability and how to mitigate it for yourself. Who's impacted? Many services are vulnerable to this exploit. Cloud services like Steam, Apple iCloud, and apps like Minecraft have already been found to be vulnerable. Anybody using Apache Struts is likely vulnerable. We've seen similar vulnerabilities exploited before in breaches like the 2017 Equifax data breach. Many open source projects like Minecraft Server, Paper, have already begun patching their usage of Log4j, and simply changing an iPhone's name has been shown to trigger the vulnerability in Apple's servers. There was an update to this post saying, according to another post, Java Development Kit versions greater than 6, 7, 8, and 11 are not affected in these versions. However, there are other attack vectors targeting this vulnerability, which can result in a remote control exploit. An attacker could still leverage existing code on the server to execute a payload and attack targeting class, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So, I guess Jonathan has yet to join, so we'll go into the other articles. Wired is covering this one, saying the internet is on fire. A vulnerability has security teams scrambling to put a fix. Associated Press, and that's how you know that this is a big exploit, is when it goes beyond the traditional security blogs and into mainstream media like AP. Recently uncovered software flaw, most critical vulnerability in the last decade, is the words from AP. Yeah, that's big. Biggest in the last decade. I mean, we have these every day. We go through tech news every day. And I'm trying to think if we've had a day in the past 9 months where there wasn't a sizable exploit. And so to call this one the biggest of the decade, that's definitely putting...
Oops, I better mute.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Better mute. Sorry, I didn't mute.
Okay. So the second biggest story is how a bug in Microsoft Teams and Android 10 and Android 11 and 12 triggered by the user not being logged into the Teams app may have caused 911 calls to fail. So it was known very recently in this week. There was reports about how people weren't able to call 911, which is the emergency number in America, using an Android if they had Microsoft Teams installed. And now this is just a deep dive into the details of what was going on in the backend. BBC reports that Microsoft Teams bug blocked Android emergency calls. Yep, that's what happened. And then The Verge says, go read the story explaining in detail the scary Teams bug that blocked a 911 call. Yep, that can be scary if you need to call 911. Easy enough.
Which you know says that there's just something wrong with Android if you can let an app do anything that would interfere with 911 calls. And we're lucky we found it now, because that could have been used, you know, in state-sponsored cyber warfare as well.
I hear that. So Tom Ryan has his hand up and just jumped on stage. Thank you for joining us, Tom. By the looks of your bio, you might be raising your hand to comment about the first story about the Java hack.
Yeah, Tyler. So the impact of that was huge. I was pretty much on calls all day until back and forth until about midnight on that one. Because, for instance, every Java app at most of the financial networks that you deal with it would be implicated with this. Now, the key thing is you know, how do you detect it and how do you remediate it? Or the couple of the big things. So there's also a post that tells you how to detect if somebody's exploiting it. So I can always send that to you as well. If they're hacking in, you know, so your security operations team will know, because they were doing a lot of spray and praise on this one all day yesterday. You know, look and see who can be exploited, you know, give everybody a nice Christmas holiday gift.
So I see you have your Twitter account linked to your Clubhouse account.
Yes.
Do you have something on your Twitter account about this one? It doesn't seem to be.
No, it's actually on my LinkedIn account.
Okay.
My LinkedIn account it'll have the POC code. It will have the detection code. It'll also tell everybody to go through what's called their SBOM, their software bill of materials, and look and see if you actually have that installed, that version installed. Or the OWASP has a free one called Dependency Track that you can use to detect it. And Sonatype, another company, is giving away for that particular track, giving it away for free to everyone just to validate because of the criticality of this.
I'm on your Facebook your LinkedIn profile, which you conveniently have typed out in your Clubhouse bio. And I see you posted it in the past 24 hours, 19 hours ago, all about the Log4j exploit info. And you have the detect in code and vulnerability scanner, which is super cool. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
the whole thing is, am I vulnerable? Am I exploitable? And how do I protect myself is the way you have to look at all these exploits. Because a lot of times people base it on risk and they won't go to fix it based on their cybersecurity insurance policies.
Right. True that. So no doubt you've been busy. And thank you for the additional context on that. So we're going to get to hang tight because there's always there's usually more than one cybersecurity story. And in fact, the second article of the day that that Microsoft Teams bug with Android 10 is not really a vulnerability, but it highlights how code, sometimes causes havoc. It's a tricky mess of spaghetti getting all these things to work together nicely. And that's where all these vulnerabilities kind of, all of the little cracks, when you put a door in a wall and, how to make that secure, ain't that easy. So the next one that I have is that TCL, which do Americans know about TCL? I know Asians do. TCL is one of the that's one of the world's largest TV companies. Is it known in the US?
What company, Tyler?
TCL.
Is that like a mailing company?
It's a TV, like
TV, okay.
television. It's a television that you buy and you put in your house so you can watch Disney videos.
Yeah, we do now. They're in Best Buy and they're in Walmart and all the stores.
Okay.
Last year. So.
Yeah, makes sense.
They also bought Grauman's Chinese Theater.
Oh, did they? That's funny.
That was like 3-4 years ago. No, more than that. 4 or 5 years ago.
They make ridiculously low-priced TVs, like unbelievable. They're kind of like the Xiaomi of TVs, although Xiaomi makes TVs now as well. But boy, was TCL kind of the low-price leader for TVs in Asia, and it seemed too good to be true when you'd go to a consumer electronics store in Asia, and they'd be like, "Why is this TV half the price of all the others?" So anyway. TCL pulls its entire Google TV lineup from Best Buy over software and performance issues. What? Why are they doing that? Let's have a little look at this. It says Google TV's plans to extend in the smart TV market are taking a hit this week as TCL's entire Google TV lineup has been pulled from Best Buy over performance-related issues. Best Buy is the only retailer that sells TCL's lineup of Google TVs, but the entire line mysteriously disappeared from the retailer this week. As it turns out, this is due to performance complaints regarding both the 5 Series and 6 Series models that have come from some early buyers as well as some reviews. TCL's own website had a user review rating of 3.5 stars for the 6 Series model, with a low score primarily attributed to software problems. In our early hands-on of TCL's Google TV lineup, we didn't see these performance issues, actually finding the experience overall more pleasant than Google's own Chromecast. However, we can say that our experience reviewing these televisions has not been good. Kyle Bradshaw has been using a 55-inch 5 Series model for a couple of months and has relayed issues with the remote, sluggish performance, and various other problems. On a 55-inch 6 Series model, I've seen fewer issues, but performance is extremely sluggish when the TV first turns on. It's a shame to see, as the panels themselves are extremely good overall, and the added storage on the TV compared to Google's Chromecast makes for a much better overall experience. Update: TCL has responded to our request for a comment confirming that the TVs were removed from Best Buy due to performance and software issues. The company tells us the following: TCL is committed to delivering premium products with a world-class experience, blah, 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 typical corporate speak. It says the company tells us that continued software updates will refine the experience over the coming weeks and that the TVs will return to Best Buy in the coming weeks. Fair enough.
Seems like the classic Asian knock that, they do hardware really well, but not software, which hasn't been the case in a while, but looks like they failed big time on the software side.
Well, the good news is that the software can be updated remotely. I mean, you just plug in.
Yeah, but if it's crappy design, they're just going to keep on iterating crappy software. So who knows? I don't.
I have two of their TVs actually, and they're fine. I've had no problems. So
yeah,
it's.
I think I have one. I'm not even sure, but I just remember. I mean, they're so much cheaper than their competitors that you can't expect it to be flawless. Like this is what, and I do remember reading the reviews that the panels were better than on a straight comparison. The picture quality is equal, if not superior, to the more expensive TVs. So
I wonder if it's a Google TV integration. Google TV is kind of new. Maybe it's something to do with that.
Yeah. So Brazil's Ministry of Health suffers a major ransomware attack, resulting in the unavailability of millions of COVID-19 certificates and the loss of 50 terabytes of data. There's a cybersecurity. I told you we'd have another cybersecurity story. And who do we imagine it is? Place your bets now as we start to read the article. And it says websites under Brazil's Ministry of Health have suffered a major ransomware attack. This should cause concern to everybody, honestly. I mean, we've had health system attacks all over the world at this point. Nothing quite major in the U.S. yet that I can recall, like this, like 50 terabytes. But if there was during a particular time, one could weaponize this in a very meaningful way. Where if in the midst of a cyber war, where the power goes out and shit gets real, and then the next thing you know, your medical system cable gets yanked, that you could cause a whole lot of havoc just in a cyber war. And the world has not really seen a cyber war yet, but it seems like we might see one in our lifetime if things if we don't figure all of this craziness out. It says
we're seeing one. It's a Cold War kind of cyber war, and the bigger implication here is that you can actually interrupt surgeries, schedules, and all those things are actually electronically done, and very little paper trails are left nowadays, as most of the systems try to adapt. So just by crippling a system like this, you can actually kill people through the friction that's created in the system as a result.
So then it says, following the attack that took place around 1 a.m. today, all of the Ministry of Health's websites, including a major system which tracks the trajectory, that's a hard word, of citizens in the public healthcare system, became unavailable. This includes COVID-19 digital vaccine certificates, which is available via their app. According to a message left by the Lapsus group, which has claimed responsibility for the attack, some 50 terabytes worth of data has been extracted from the system and subsequently deleted. Quote, contact us if you want the data returned, the message said, alongside contact details for the authors of the attack. Just before 7 a.m., the images with the message left by the attackers were removed, but the website remained unavailable. Contacted about the measures in place to mitigate the attack and reestablish the systems and whether there are backups of the data allegedly stolen from its system, the Ministry of Health has not returned requests for comment at the time of writing. The incident follows a previous attack on the Brazilian Health Regulatory Agency in September. The attack was focused on the healthcare declaration for travelers, compulsory for individuals entering Brazil via airports. The attack took place soon after the cancellation of the World Cup qualifier match between Brazil and Argentina. Similarly, the latest issue faced by the Ministry of Health occurs amid increasing pressure on the Brazilian government to demand COVID-19 vaccination certificates from international travelers coming to Brazil.
Okay. I wonder if this is something that, it could be like an activist effort. I think there's a lot of compliance fatigue. That's kind of what's happening to a lot of people as we're potentially discussing locking things down or making travel really strict. I think a lot of people are just really tired of it. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was internal.
Yeah, I've never heard of Lapsus Group. Anyway, so the next one, shall we, is from Reuters covered that. Yeah, who else? Carried out by the new Lapsus. Someone says this is a new a new ransomware gang. Catalin is a cybersecurity news reporter saying that this is a new ransomware gang, which is why no one's ever heard of it. Okay. So the next one is that Instacart president, Carolyn Everson, says she will step down at the end of the year, less than 4 months after joining the company. Another high-profile Instacart executive is leaving the grocery delivery service company. Carolyn Everson announced Friday she will step down as president at the end of the year. The surprise decision comes 3 months after, 3 or 4, I guess 3, started and follows the exit of a second top executive in October. And the latest shakeup in Instacart's C-suite follows the exits the head of advertising, Seth Dallaire, who left for Walmart in October. The company has hired several big executives from Facebook, Amazon, and Google, even though Instacart's valuation has grown quickly to nearly $40 billion this year. Some of the newcomers, including Everson, are used to running far larger teams. Everson spent more than 10 years at Facebook as its ads chief and was Instacart's CEO Fidji Simo's most high-profile hire. Simo, the former head of Facebook app, took over from founder of Instacart earlier this year. Everson was seen as one of the most prominent women behind Facebook CEO Sheryl Sandberg, but she left the company after Marnie Levine, not Everson, was promoted to chief business officer last summer. Simo and Everson told CNBC the decision was mutual. Quote, "We believe it's the right decision for both the company and Carolyn based on our priorities and the role she was looking for at this point in her career." Simo said in a statement, quote, "She'll be staying on with us through the end of the year and leaves as a friend of the company." Everson oversees several divisions at Instacart, including advertising, partnerships, policy, and legal. Instacart has cited its advertising business as one of the fastest growing segments, but it's looking to push its cash-intensive business of quick commerce or 15-minute delivery to compete with the likes of DoorDash and GoPuff, according to sources who asked to remain anonymous because they aren't authorized to speak publicly. The plan to trial 15-minute delivery was first reported by The Information. Instacart was widely anticipated to go public this year, but reportedly pushed back plans to focus on growth under new leadership. Everson said in a Facebook post that as her 50th birthday approaches, she will take time off before deciding her next step. And let me read some of the tweets here, some speculation. Someone named Aram says, "Here's my bet. Instacart vastly overestimated how much it could make with ads and isn't even coming close. The closer to the top level of the org these estimates come from, the less close to reality they are from what I've seen." And he might be right. I happen to be friends with the CTO co-founder of Instacart, Max Mullen, and we've been friends long before Instacart. And he's come into Tech News Around the World once or twice before, some of you will recall. So let's see. I know he's a Clubhouse user, and in fact, he's a Clubhouse investor, angel investor. So let's see if Max Mullen will jump in to Clubhouse and give us the gospel on what really is going on over there. So I just sent Max a ping, and he did respond when we did ping him last time. So please keep an eye out in Clubhouse for one Mr. Max Mullen. And if he jumps in, just shout. You can interrupt me in the middle of a sentence if you like. All right. And he's the CTO co-founder of Instacart, now worth $40 billion. And if you hear the jealousy in my voice, yes, you are correct. I'm incredibly jealous of Max, of my buddy making a $40 billion company. Although I'm not surprised. Max is totally brilliant, and we used to do hackathons together and stuff. And just a really smart dude, and totally deserves that. And if you heard me when we were together, when he jumped in the room last time, I told him how proud I am of him and how he absolutely deserves it. So, but I'm, in full transparency, I really hope the best for Instacart's long-term future. I know he has kind of stepped down day to day, and because he's been grinding very hard on that for a very long time. And you can only do that stuff for so long. By the way, it's like being an athlete. I mean, this is one of the. Of course, I'm stalling to see if Max is going to pop in, but one of the points to keep in mind is like most people can only hang in there for around 7 years, it seems, and even the co-founders, have a hard time pacing themselves beyond that because it's very much like being an athlete. Like the pressure is quite extreme. And
sorry, Casey, I'm going to get going now. Casey, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to get going now.
Okay.
So we'll talk to you again. Thank you, Casey. But I just had that problem with Jaws, so I wonder if...
I think James wasn't aware his mic was open. But anyway, I just muted you, James, just in case that was an accident. So we'll go into the next story. Hopefully Max Mullen will pop in, give us the gospel on what's going on at Instacart. And then the next story is from the Wall Street Journal. It says, a look at the impact of supercomputers on chess, as world champion Magnus Carlsen from Norway, who boasts of being the least influenced by a computer, wins another title. And yeah, there's been
do we have to dig out Big Blue again to have him beat this guy, or
yeah,
what do we got to do? I thought that was settled, that whole man versus computer on
me too.
chess.
This article says computers revolutionized chess. Magnus Carlsen wins by being human. Chess engines were supposed to make classical chess more predictable. Instead, they made the most inventive player of all time more creative. The world chess champion was already a week old when something stunning happened in Game 6. The World Chess Championship was a week old when something stunning happened in Game 6. After nearly 8 hours of play last Friday, someone actually won. It was the first time in 5 years that a championship classical game, the format played under long-time controls, did not end in a draw. The chess world could hardly believe what it was seeing. In the age of supercomputer-trained super grandmasters, there were widespread fears that world championships were becoming dull and predictable. No, not chess. Dull and predictable? Come on. What are you talking about? This is like this is the most exciting. This is like MMA.
Golf is dull and predictable.
No. Come on. You have your really dull, boring sports like golf. Some would even say baseball, and then you've got your full action, adrenaline, skydiving, MMA, chess, Preparation seemed to trump inventiveness. Instead, this era brought out the brilliance of perhaps the most brilliant chess player ever, Magnus Carlsen of Norway, steamrolled Russia's Ian Nepomniachtchi. Holy cow, that's like a Quetzalcoatl name. That's a wild one right there. Sorry, I'm not going to be able to pronounce that. In the best of a 14 series, capturing a decisive victory that solidified his legacy as the greatest in the history of the sport. He has been the world champion since 2013. This was his 5th win and is the highest rated player of all time. What even his rivals marvel at is how Carlsen, 31, has weaponized the computer revolution against them. He does it not by overpowering opponents with calculation, but by harnessing that digital knowledge to turn games into more human battles. Quote, Magnus is proud of saying that he's probably the top player who works the least with the computer and is the least influenced by a computer, said Carlsen's coach. He wants to trust his own evaluation, his human touch, and to keep that. And what's the point of the article here? I'm having a hard time finding it, Wall Street Journal.
Just as a fun fact,
Tyler.
Yes.
Data is in the clubhouse.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
The fact that there was a clear winner and the game was not ended in a draw after several years, I think that's the point.
But who won? Why didn't they just say who won?
I don't know why.
It's okay, we get it. It didn't end in a draw. That means somebody won. So who won? So that we can figure out what the point is of this article.
Well, I think it shows that humans can still play chess, because I think a few years ago, the idea was that, oh, okay, well, computers are playing it now, and of course, computers with humans can do much better than humans alone.
Did he beat a computer though? Like it didn't? Did he beat an AI? I don't understand the article.
I see what they're doing. They're starting to do weird stuff now, where like the opponent is allowed to use a supercomputer as an assistant for calculating moves. So you have the best of Well, there's a new type of play where it's human plus machines, basically.
Collaborative AI.
Yeah, AAI, artificial
Total
intelligence.
integration coming soon.
Yeah. So anyway,
sorry, if I could just add one cool thing that I think perhaps people don't appreciate, which is, it doesn't sound like a sport, but the people who actually play chess actually burn quite a lot of calories, and you can say that it's from brain activity or stress, but the collection of those two factors together makes it actually quite an intense sport on the human body, which was like always surprising and shocking to me, but it just goes to show that the human brain is in fact the best muscle or organ that we have.
But the fact remains that all the moves are predetermined and, nothing exciting or inventive is happening.
How dare you?
Sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, you bring up an interesting question, though. It's like, where are the women in chess?
Where are they?
No interest.
Is it no interest? There's a lot of guys,
I think it's no interest.
chess players who have daughters who.
I'm sure there's plenty of interest, Tyler, but I think women can't stand that long of a presence with other men thinking about chess moves. Sorry.
Okay, next up.
DARPA already did the alpha dog.
Hey, Tyler, I thought you wanted Data to go through the vulnerability article in the first.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's right. Data, we thank you for joining us. We pinged you in because the top story today was about cybersecurity. And Tom Ryan on stage helped us unpack it a bit. And just to circle back on that one, it's all about the vulnerability in the Java library called Log4j, which allows for remote code execution, RCE, impacting some incredibly big apps like Minecraft and platforms like Steam and iCloud and others.
In Apache servers.
Yes, Apache Software Foundation releases a security fix now for Log4j 0-day, which was discovered during a bug bounty engagement against Minecraft servers. Just one.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You're muted, Data.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm actually dealing with it myself for my full-time job. Locking things down, and so essentially, we're really interesting vulnerability, and it affects Cloudflare too. So if anybody is actually using Cloudflare, definitely check your Cloudflare. And so, which pretty much everyone's using Cloudflare. Well, big organizations at least. Look, there's a lot of developments coming out on it, but essentially, like, you're able to basically just query anything that you want to a point where, you can query. So let me simplify this. Specific. Let's just say you send a specific string. A command, let's just say, through the command line, you can actually get private tweets at this point, right? So this is a very, very critical issue that everyone's trying to fix. I think probably Tom gave you a little bit of an overview. I suppose the impact of this is going to be known, in a few days, see who's affected, how much data has been actually stolen, how many companies have been breached. I actually, I locked us down too much in the company that I work for, so I'm actually kind of rolling things back a little bit. But we're working around the clock to make sure that we're pretty safe in our space. And I work in the crypto space, so and this is a really big, everyone's using Java, and something that's it's one of those vulnerabilities that is like, how did we miss this? That's exactly what people are saying. How did we miss this? But I suppose, yeah, I think we should probably circle back on Monday to see like the impact. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of articles, and I mean, there's just tons of data just leaking everywhere, and then those corporations that don't have those incident response teams are being just killed right now. I mean, even in Twitter, if we're searching just for log4j, I mean, people are literally exploiting live right now. They're exploiting Twitter even. They haven't even locked themselves down. So this is something that does everyone, but I think it is to be seen within the next few days. Yep.
Okay.
So you mentioned Cloudflare. If I remember correctly, they have everybody give them their security certificates in order to work with Cloudflare. So potentially everybody's certificates are exposed and exploitable for impersonation type attacks.
Right. So this is the interesting thing. So Cloudflare did issue a they updated their WAF and web application firewall, and they are blocking specific requests, let's just call them, right? But it's not working. Like if you have an incident response team, you need to actually get your team on this now. Like, don't just rely on Cloudflare's rules at all. The sanitization, right? That do not rely on that. I'm like I said, I'm literally dealing with it right now with my team, and I'm a security engineer for my crypto company. Don't rely on them. Take care. Like, make sure you know someone that knows how to configure these things correctly, because they're kind of struggling to keep their platform safe. Yeah, everyone is at risk right now.
Okay.
Yeah, but other than having crazy security, like the things that we can do is engage in better, data protection, I guess behaviors, but also insurance policies have also developed in the last few years that offer some sort of, financial piggy bank in case something like this does happen. So it's interesting to see going forward how the insurance companies will respond to this in offering perhaps better policies.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree in that sense. I guess, but when it comes to insurance, though, I believe in this case it'd be too late, right, to engage in that, right? It's a critical point for people to call somebody and secure your systems before everything gets taken. So yeah, thank you.
Okay. So the next article in my list here is a company called True North, a logistics service for independent truckers, raises $50 million. And Bloomberg says they have sources which are saying that Binance, which is arguably the world's biggest crypto exchange, along with Coinbase, and is in talks to set up a cryptocurrency exchange in Indonesia with PT Bank Central Asia, owned by the Hortonos, India's richest family. Okay. And the next one is from Protocol. It says a profile of the Coalition for App Fairness, a group created by Epic, Spotify, Match Group, and others, seeking to open Google and Apple app stores to competition. Now, that's kind of interesting because those names that I read have something in common. Epic and Spotify and Match and Tile is the other. And what they have in common is they were all together in the big lawsuit to support Epic against Apple and Google. So now they're forming some new effort, which no doubt they'll bring lots of others in. And so the article, if Cheryl could share. I'll share this one at the top of Twitter, Cheryl. If you could share it at the top of Twitter Spaces, that would be great, so everyone can see this.
Yep, one. Shared.
Okay. Yep. I just shared it in Clubhouse. Oh, sorry, we don't support that link. It says. Well, let's try this again. Let's see. Toggle. There it is. Okay. Alrighty, here we go. So it says in the article, Apple once seemed unbeatable in Washington. Here's how a small group of developers and companies like Tile, Spotify, and Epic, and Match, which is Tinder, helped change that. And these are companies who were very vocal about how Apple is a very bad company in how they play dirty. It says when Christian Daru took a job as the general counsel at Tile, and you can understand why Tile's pissed off at Apple, because Tile has these cute little physical tiles to help you find your objects, and the next thing you know, Apple comes out with AirTags. Makes sense. You would be pissed off too, right? So she hadn't thought she'd still be using her background in antitrust, but less than a year into her new job, she was talking to Congress about U.S. competition policy and telling them something was very wrong. Daru once defended companies in antitrust class action lawsuits, but when she joined Tile in early 2019, her more recent focus had been on privacy. Her company allows users to find lost items through physical tags that pair electronically with smartphones, meaning it deals in plenty of sensitive user data. Apple itself even touted Tile's offerings as the kind of add-on service that made an iPhone attractive to customers. And so Daru hadn't imagined her new company was facing competition concerns with the tech giant, according to a person familiar with her thinking. Soon after Daru started, though, Apple made it difficult for Tile's hardware to get permission to work with iPhones. And here starts the problem. Is when Apple knows that they want to compete with you, they start making things a little more difficult for you than they do for themselves. And that's the essence of the problem. Tile saw that change, among some others, as attempts to squash its success. The iPhone maker cited privacy and security concerns. Even as it developed and launched AirTags, a similar offering in response that fall, Daru quietly briefed the staff of the House Antitrust Subcommittee, which was probing the competitive behavior of tech giants soon after the panel urged her to go public. At the same time, it was rare for the app developers, even large ones, to criticize Apple out loud. Yet both Daru and Tile CEO C.G. Prober, who early in his career had focused on mergers and acquisitions at Silicon Valley's premier antitrust law firm, decided to tell their side of the story for all to see. So in January 2020, the congressional staff dealt with light bulbs, and Washington-based reporters monitored a coming snowstorm. Daru appeared publicly at the field hearing in Boulder, calling repeatedly for Congress to create a level playing field for America's software entrepreneurs. Since Daru's testimony, Apple has faced increased scrutiny and pressure from both lawmakers and the public over its competitive behavior more than any other time in its modern history. On Wednesday, a federal appeals court stayed a ruling that ordered that the company to begin allowing apps to tell customers how to use alternative payment methods, which in turn allows developers to avoid giving Apple 30% cut in the charges for many transactions on iOS. Despite the setback for developers, the decision, which could still go into effect pending an appeal, shows how close they have come to dismantling a policy Apple defends for years. Certainly, Apple's hit hard, etc., etc. So anyway, Daru has encouraged others to join the Coalition for App Fairness, a group Tile launched alongside Basecamp, Epic Games, and others. The group, which now boasts 60 members, large and small, has become a nerve center of activity by the most ardent foes of the Google Apple app stores. Quote, "There was one thing that really unified us," said a public policy and government affairs lead at Proton, a privacy-focused mail app that helped fund the coalition. Quote, "We all were completely dependent on the App Store. This was really our gateway to our customers, and Apple, with pretty much one click, could really destroy our businesses." By May 2020, Epic was already planning to spend $80,000 to $100,000 to launch the coalition, according to documents Apple included as part of the lawsuit with Epic. And so now they're forming this group.
It's kind of sad, actually, with respect to Unreal, which is the technology that Epic develops. With the most recent updates, some of the components, actually, the most impressive components that allow you to film in virtual reality, kind of like how James Cameron does. So you have your iPad out. It uses its LiDAR. You can move around the room, and then you're filming kind of the person and the environment all in one. You're seeing it all live. That somehow, mysteriously, magically, has become crippled and unable to be used. I was preparing to teach some metaverse Unreal Engine stuff the last few days and trying to prepare that content. And there's all these bugs that seem to have no direct reason why they're not working anymore. So Apple has a way of doing this, I think, more than just once. They do this quite often. And in fact, famously, Steve Jobs, I think, in one of the advertising acquisitions, one of the mobile advertising companies, there was some sort of disagreement there. And Steve Jobs said, well, we could always make it much harder for your app to work on our platform. And I think that's just a general tactic, but that's a bully tactic, and that's very much anti-competitive. So at least from the perspective of the collective, we have billion-dollar companies now challenging a trillion-dollar company. So I wouldn't say they're small little companies, but still it takes a lot of them to come together to actually make this argument.
But it seems like they're putting their collective resources together to compete with, these huge, very well-funded opponents like Apple and Google. That makes perfect sense. Because the reality is these court cases are one thing, but what goes on between the court cases with the big companies and the politicians is another thing. Because that's where the rules get drawn up that inform these court decisions. So that's an interesting article. Okay, so the next one is from CNET, that Facebook, now known as Meta, struggles with harassment in VR, where solutions like letting users record everything need to be balanced with privacy and headsets, storage, and power. This sounds a little bit like the attempted hit piece against Clubhouse, where there was an article written recently claiming that Clubhouse is filled with porn and blah 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 blah, and as if the journalists have some sort of expectation that all humans behave, like your grandmother all the time. And of course there's going to be bad behavior in the metaverse. Of course there's going to be idiots in Clubhouse or any social audio app. But just because, your publication is boring as all get out doesn't mean, that's how social apps work. These are actual people. Planet Earth Earth is doing a really bad job of moderating all the dumb shit that happens on planet Earth. Every country you can think of is doing a pretty bad, other than China, is doing a pretty bad job of moderating all the dumb fuckery that's happening in their territories as well. But where are those articles? What do you want every app to be North Korea? Is that your point? What exactly are you trying to say here? I guess there's a generation of people who expect there never to be any bad thing that ever happens on any app. As Facebook plans the metaverse, it struggles to combat harassment in VR. Social VR can be fun. It can also be toxic. That's the headline. Sydney Smith, let me guess, you're going to tell the story of Now here is the trick of the day. The journalists of 2021 have figured out a clever little trick, a clever little hack, and everybody hates them for it. And here's why. Because they find one person who had one negative experience on Facebook's VR system, and now they write an article saying Facebook's got problems because we found somebody who had a negative experience in Facebook's platform. And the word some is going to become the new, gateway to writing takedown pieces and, faux rage clickbait. Because one person is some. It's a person, so somebody had a negative experience. Some people are having a negative experience.
If
Sydney
it's
Smith.
Snowflake bleeds, it's Snowflake leads.
It's like that Russell Peters joke. Somebody's going to get hurt real bad. And here you have somebody told me, and who was that? Well, I don't know. I can't say.
Well, this one's name.
I want to push back on this just a little bit. All right,
Go ahead,
as someone who's in Horizon Worlds,
yes.
What's going on now that it's open? what I'm seeing is that
Are
a
people
lot of
selling? Hold
real
on, friend. Are people selling NFT heroin in there already in the metaverse?
no, they're screaming the N word all over the
Oh,
place
okay.
and disrupting classes and activities,
Ah,
and so it's disturbing. There has to be some way to kind of monitor this stuff.
yeah.
Um,
It's called
there
identity
were kids
verification. Yeah.
clearly like 8-year-old kids, and it's supposed to be 18 and over.
Ah, so we need what you're begging for is identity verification.
Yes, I am.
So can you have like the censorship in time? So anybody, because you have that in other social media, like in Facebook, or even in Clubhouse, in the captions, if you say like F words or some other words, they won't be shown.
I don't know. I mean, but the thing is that any child can borrow their parents' Quest 2, put it on their head, and go into Horizon World. Even more so now that it's open.
Sydney Smith. I appreciate the additional context, Fran, because as I mentioned, I think yesterday, I think you probably spend more, have more mileage, airtime in the metaverse. I don't know what the equivalent of miles or airtime is in the metaverse, but
It's years at this point.
yeah, flight hours logged. Eh, so, I mean, your experience is very valid, and the context is very helpful. And so, this article talks about Sydney Smith has dealt with lewd sexist remarks for more than a month while playing the Echo VR video game, but the 20-year-old reached her breaking point this summer. Echo VR places players in the bodies of futuristic robots, allowing them to compete in a zero-gravity sports game that's similar to Ultimate Frisbee. Players, each identified by a username that floats above their avatar, split up into two teams and score points when they throw a disc through an opponent's goal. In July, Smith was playing a game on Oculus Quest 2 headset when she missed catching the disc and uttered the F word out of frustration. Oh, Jesus. See, you can't do that in North Korea, by the way. You can't just let those things slip. So a player who's been hurling insults at her teammates earlier quickly took notice. The player taunted Smith, telling the Missouri resident that he'd recorded her and was going to jerk off to her cursing. See, I thought he was going to report her to the PLA or the CCP, but no. He took a really interesting turn and said he was going to jerk off to her cursing. Okay, well that's one way.
Yeah, for anyone who's played video games, like I think Counter-Strike is like famous for being super toxic. I don't think this is anything new. I think this is perhaps more a new thing for normies or people who are more into this. Oh, it's all virtual. We're all going to be friends, kumbaya, happy tree friends. But it turns out that those toxic people from those previous platforms just migrated over with the next wave. And so it's not surprising. It's just sad to see that there's no moderation rules.
So Smith tried to figure out which player had harassed her so she could file a report. But that was tough because multiple people were talking at the same time. Since she hadn't been recording the match, Smith couldn't rewatch the encounter and look for a username. Quote, "That really, really bothered me," Smith said of the incident. "I couldn't touch the game for 2 weeks after that." Smith isn't the only virtual reality player she's not the only one. There's actually two now. And so now there's a series because one is an isolated incident, but when you've got two, now you've got a history. You've got a whole long, rich history of. Smith isn't the only virtual reality player who's had trouble reporting an ugly run-in. Though Oculus and Echo VR, both owned by Facebook, have ways to report users who violate their rules. People who've experienced or witnessed harassment and offensive behavior in virtual environments say a cumbersome process deters them from filing a report. Content moderators have to examine a person's behavior as well as words. Oculus VR policy says users aren't allowed to follow other users against their wishes, make sexual gestures, or block someone's normal movement. As Facebook focuses on creating the metaverse a 3D digital world where people play, work, learn, and socialize, content moderation will only get more complex. The company, which recently rebranded as Meta to highlight its ambitions, already struggles to combat hate speech and harassment on its popular social media platforms, where people leave behind a record of their remarks. The immersive spaces such as Horizon Worlds envisioned by CEO Mark Zuckerberg will be more challenging to police. This story is partly...
Tyler,
Yes.
as sensationalized as this article is, we have to agree at some point it is their responsibility to make reporting seamless
Yep.
and easy,
Yep.
accessible and front facing. That
I agree.
shouldn't have been the issue, whether it was 1 or 1,000 people.
Yep.
So that point is clear and it rings true.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
But if I may, there's clever ways of doing moderation. Like one of the things that a lot of people are talking about is, hey, if somebody's being disruptive in the virtual world, how about you make them smaller and modulate their tone of their voice proportionally so they sound smaller and smaller and smaller, and that gives them a social shame because then everyone laughs at this little squeaky little small character. So we can do it creatively, or we can take out the band hammer and go all out.
You want like a social credit score system in the metaverse?
Hey, come on through, China.
I kind of like it. And by the way, if it works, we could start trying it in other
In real world.
Yeah. So, by the way, I mean, having points. If I'm surprised there's not an app, like for example, all of the social apps, everyone has followers. That isn't used as some kind of currency or credit for features in the app. So, for example, and in a loose way, it might be, for example, people who have more quote unquote social currency in Instagram are able to get the newest features before other people, or maybe people with really low scores don't get it at all. And then don't forget you have Uber and Airbnb where there actually are very real reviews with very real scores for both parties, the driver and the rider, or the host and the guest. And then the really wild thought is, what if all of those were mergeable, where your Airbnb reviews and your Uber reviews and your Hilton hotel review, a score was created privately as a social score amongst companies that kept that private, a kind of a unification, a federation of ratings.
Sounds like an idea for a startup.
It does. That's been an idea of mine for a very long time. So, you just get everybody to partner in with it, and they all benefit from it. But the problem is,
but you have to, the bots. You have to deal with the bots problem.
Yes.
Then in the end, who has the higher tech, to create those, then will benefit from the system. So I think it's a balance between this. For not using a social credit, because in China, your life is gonna be very miserable with wrong ratings, and you have no way to claim it's wrong.
Alrighty. So I think there is going to be identity verification in the metaverse precisely for this problem. Just as Fran's saying, I think most people would agree that they're going to want to see that.
For sure.
So, like I said, I've said it's coming for a while now. Anyway, so the next one says Service Trade, which offers SaaS applications to commercial service contractors, raises $85 million. Who cares? The heavily indebted Chinese chip conglomerate Tsinghua Unigroup says a consortium led by 2 state-backed VC firms would become its strategic investor. That's not a surprise. What's going on there is China wants to have its own chips, just like America does, just like everybody does. Everyone wants to have their own chips so they're less dependent on other countries for something that is so critical. And so you have the state-backed VCs are going to invest in a Chinese chip conglomerate. Yeah, of course they're going to do that because America's not making it really possible or easy for American investors to invest in that stuff. And the next one's from the LA Times. Some trans and non-binary drivers say that Uber banned their accounts after it treated their documents as fraudulent. Uber says it's working to restore their accounts. What? What is that about? Hold on. Uber blocks transgender drivers from signing up, is the headline from the LA Times. It says, Adrian Escobedo signed up to drive for Uber Eats to help support his family after his fiancée lost her job. The couple and their 4-year-old son had just moved to Bakersfield. Money was tight, but after a lunch break on his first day, Escobedo found himself locked out of the app. His documentation had not been approved. Escobedo tried at least 20 times to resubmit the records, which included a photo of his face, copies of his ID, and proof of car insurance. He said each time they were declined. Quote, "I was very confused as to what was going wrong." Escobedo said, I thought it was being messed with. Then, looking over his documents, Escobedo figured it out. He's a transgender man, and his appearance in his older driver's license photo doesn't match the current photo he submitted, showing his wispy mustache and goatee. Uber at times has blocked transgender and non-binary people from driver and delivery jobs by treating their documents as fraudulent, suspending their accounts and failing to rectify the situation, according to interviews with drivers and documentation provided by the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California, which petitioned the company to restore Escobedo's account. Drivers have had their accounts permanently banned, according to documentation and written communication with the company shared by 5 workers. None managed to get their accounts reactivated through Uber's appeal process. One driver had been working for Uber Eats for more than a year without issue, prompted by the company's marketing of a new option allowing transgender drivers to update their names and profile pictures. She resubmitted her documents in late August. Her profile photo was rejected as fraudulent, and her account was shut down, and she was permanently removed from the platform. Blocked applicants say they spent hours messaging and calling the support desk, often to no end, and haggling with Uber for days to get their true name displayed instead of their dead name from before they transitioned. At the time when a worker shortage has emerged as a key problem for Uber, the company's approach pushed all of these drivers to other app-based services, including Lyft and DoorDash, which for years have had policies accommodating name changes for transgender drivers. The missteps have also undermined Uber's stated commitment to more inclusive and equitable practices and highlights the dearth of protections for independent contractors who face discrimination. Uber spokesman Zahid Arab said that matching profile photos to government IDs is a fraud prevention measure the company undertakes as part of its safety protocols. Arab said in an email that on occasion requests can be misrouted and results in a regrettable customer experience, which we are working to address. Uber and our partners make every effort to remedy situations like this in a timely manner. We continue to work on improving internal processes and working with our third-party background check providers to help ensure the background checks process runs as expected for transgender and non-binary users.
This reminds me of a story a few weeks ago where a similar thing was happening to people of color, where they were uploading their photos and they were being denied because the algorithm couldn't detect them properly. And that turned out not to be discrimination. It turned out to be, I think, an error with the automated system. So I'm curious what the nature of the, like if you have repeatedly submitted appeals and requests for re-examination, what was the process? What was the protocol? Was it a algorithm, and then finally by the 5th time it was a human? Because I think that's an important part of the discussion here if we're going to talk about equity and equality.
Well, this isn't an Uber issue at all, because it's not even Uber who's doing, they say very specifically, it's a third party that they use to do this identity verification, which is a very serious issue in Uber, because you have people who have legal driver's licenses and they have tons of friends who don't, who would like to drive, who are not even legal to be in a country. You have a lot of people in the US who are not legally there who want to drive. And so they don't have a legal ID to do that. So they have a friend who does have a legal ID, and that's how they find themselves able to drive. Well, Uber made a system to address that very serious issue, which is very, very large. We're talking thousands of times a day. This issue, relatively, I imagine, is statistically a much smaller issue and is a victim of that circumstance, essentially. And it's a third-party system. It's not even Uber itself who does the identity checks. They hire out another company to do that. And by the way, Uber's not the only company that uses that third party. I imagine dozens, if not hundreds of tech companies use that third-party system to do that. So these same people would have the same problems on hundreds of other apps. So the LA Times, though, is dancing on kind of demonizing Uber in this way instead of pointing out the bigger I feel important context, the bigger reality that we're going to start having lots of identity verification. We just mentioned it in the last headline about the metaverse, for Christ's sakes. I was just saying how we're going to have. So is Facebook gonna? Are we to expect an article about how Facebook is not trans friendly in about 10 minutes because for the exact same reasons when they add the identity verification we just spoke about 10 minutes ago to the metaverse? That's what will happen. But this isn't a Facebook issue or an Uber issue. It's an identity verification issue, and it's a tricky challenge. Trans aside, it's a very tricky, difficult issue. It's not trivial. It requires a lot of humans, a mix of human and tech, because it's a tricky thing to do remotely unless you're there in person. And trans makes it even more tricky, and they should account for it. And for the app, especially if you're an app who vocalizes your support for the trans community, so which Uber does. So, no doubt they want to fix it, and they don't like receiving pieces like this. But my point is, I think the LA Times could go one step further and point out the interesting aspect of how this goes way beyond Uber, and is likely to go into every other, the metaverse as a whole in the very near future.
Well, one thing to note is that China is definitely approaching this in a way that the West isn't. So it is able to address this somewhat with their identity verification. But just as a side note to that, the president of China, or however you want to refer to him, the many hats that he wears, he has his own app on their app store called the Xi Jinping app, I believe, and. So there's a lot to be desired about sometimes the efficiency with which communism can operate. But some of the things I think are problematic. So if we do engage in identity verification, I think we're going to have to be very careful that we don't make it impossible for rehabilitation to occur. So let's say if there are some young kids, for example, or like in the previous story or in this story, we have some violation of something, there should be a more robust appeals process. And I suspect that's probably a labor shortage because we're trying to automate so much of this just because of the sheer numbers on these platforms.
Okay, next one is from the Wall Street Journal that SenseTime, which was just in the news yesterday because America is now making it SenseTime has been added to a list that Americans cannot invest in because they're planning to do an IPO in Hong Kong. And the reason is because SenseTime is China's facial recognition system, which every person in China is in. And they've caught, there's been headlines, and SenseTime itself promotes the fact that they've caught bad actors at football games in an arena of...
Tyler, isn't not just people who are in China, but people who visited China, they're probably on it as well.
Almost certainly, yes. So, and to that point, so are Uyghurs in the Xinjiang province, so our autonomous zone. And that's why the Biden administration has added SenseTime to the block list, because SenseTime is used in the Xinjiang province to control the Uyghur population, and that's why Americans are now banned from being able to invest in it. So, and by the way, yesterday, as Professor Office and our European friends, or especially our UK friends know, there was an independent investigation into the Uyghur situation, and the decision was that there is in fact a genocide happening by an independent council in Xinjiang province. I imagine that came out of the UK, as I recall. Like, it was the UK publications who were kind of sharing that news yesterday. We can tweet it if you like, but it's, you can find it on BBC and what have you. So SenseTime is in the headlines today because SenseTime is delaying its Hong Kong IPO scheduled for Friday as the U.S. bans American investors from buying its shares over human rights abuses against Uyghurs. And let's look at the South China Morning Post version of this headline. It says the White House has placed the company on an investment blacklist over alleged human rights abuses in Xinjiang, although with the new independent council report coming yesterday, it's not really so much alleged anymore. Earlier this week, the AI company cut its IPO size by more than half amid a sell-off in technology stocks triggered by regulatory and privacy concerns. So this makes perfect sense. You would do the same if you were SenseTime, where if you were planning to do a Hong Kong IPO, and the day of your IPO or the day before your IPO, the United States of America and their president says, Americans are not allowed to invest in this because it's aiding and abetting in the genocide of Uyghurs, you might want to delay your IPO, a week or 2, 3, a month, to kind of avoid the, PR disaster that you wake up to that day of your IPO. So yeah, not a surprise that they're going to go ahead and delay this. I would do the same myself. So the next one is Volvo Cars here in Stockholm, although owned by a Chinese company, discloses a security breach that led to R&D data theft and could impact the company's operations. The Snatch ransomware gang claims responsibility. And I could ping in a whole bunch of people into the room here from Volvo via email, but I'm not connected with them on Twitter. Swedish car maker Volvo Cars has disclosed that unknown attackers have stolen research and development information after hacking some of its servers. Quote, Volvo Cars has become aware that one of its file repositories has been illegally accessed by a third party, the company disclosed today. Quote, investigations so far confirm that the limited amount of the company's R&D property has been stolen during the intrusion. Volvo Cars has earlier today concluded, based on information available, that there may be an impact on the company's operation. Volvo said it notified relevant authorities, which would be SAPO here in Sweden, after discovering the incident and is now investigating the data theft together with third-party experts. Quote, the company does not see, with current available information, that this has an impact on the safety or security of its customers, cars, or the personal data. And what they're referring to is the ability to get into your cars digitally or something, like somehow do something that would unlock the doors or make the car, because cars are computers at this point in 2021. They're sort of computers on wheels. So if they had access to some data that could make those cars less safe than they should be ordinarily, which is a real potential possibility. But they say they don't have reason to believe that at the moment. While the company did not disclose any other details of the breach, the Snatch ransomware gang has already claimed the attack. The ransomware added an entry on their data leak website on November 30 about breaching Volvo Car Corporation servers and stealing files during the intrusion, together with screenshots of the stolen files as proof. Since then, Snatch has also leaked 35.9 megabytes of what they claim to be documents stolen from Volvo's servers during the intrusion. The company refused to comment about more details. Quote, Volvo Cars does not comment on speculation about potential cyber security attacks, but takes all potential threats to its cybersecurity and thefts of its property seriously. Cybersecurity is an integral part and top priority of our global development work and operations. Volvo Cars actively participates in and contributes to the international work of standardization and best practices and apply industry-accepted recommendations on cybersecurity. And we cannot comment any further.
So I have a question for you, Tyler.
Go ahead, Don.
So if you think about IP law, and I'm not a lawyer, but I do know a little bit about IP, intellectual property, and disclosure. I'm an investor and inventor. But I was going to say that the thing that's interesting about this is technically, if that R&D is posted, it can be considered public disclosure. And so for people to think about how crazy that is. So now suddenly that information can be used by anybody to build any type of vehicle. Remember, it was R&D information specifically. And I wonder if we're going to see more of that as a sort of mission-driven hacker approach, where a lot of these large organizations have spent millions and millions of dollars to actually secure their intellectual property. A lot of that is pre-publishing as patents, or some of it's trade secrets. And if they are published online, stolen and published online, is technically, depending on, I think in most countries, that's considered public disclosure. And so you usually have, depending on the jurisdiction, up to a year before you have to now file. It's first to file, so you have to actually go and file. But if somebody files before you, now they can say that you're infringing on their patent.
Funny.
This is a crazy thing that could happen with this. But again, remember, what's interesting about this one is this is not customer data. This is not accessing the units, units out in the field remotely. This is legitimately R&D disclosure, which is a fascinating sort of new way of doing ransomware.
So, Danish, I'm going to jump in on that. There's going to be a couple, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but there's a couple of things to consider. I think the public disclosure, you release a trade secret, it's not a trade secret, but I think there are exceptions to that if you took reasonable measures to protect it and someone's like this nefariously posted it, I think you can still claim rights to it, right? So and it is still your information. And second, this is actually a trend with the ransomware gangs, is that they both either lock up your systems and or steal data. So it's a double dip. And what they do is then hold you ransom and hold the put the data out there. So you have to pay to get the data back. So even if you have backups and can get your systems going again, they are going to hold you over the barrel with this data. So what they tend to do, and same with the PII, is they're not posting all of it. They're posting drips of it. So what they posted there is probably just a little bit to show that they actually have it. It's not going to be enough to disclose actual secrets that anyone can act on, most likely. So that's the trend that they're doing.
I think this actually will set a new precedent in terms of legislation. So this shows that we need legislative support or protections in the case of any sort of cyber intrusion or theft.
So they're already moving on that in the U.S. Remember, this is global, right? So in the U.S., they're already moving on it. Biden pushed out his bill that he wanted pushed through a year ago, and that's rolling down through the legislative agencies to put more definition around it. So you've got like the national security, NIST, a bunch of them, and it's rolling down by industry. So it's rolling out through government contractors. Any vendors that do contracting for the government are going to have to meet certain standards, and because they have sub vendors and a lot of people, including third-party products in their code, in their products, et cetera, it's going to roll out that way. They also have ones that are rolling out through, the FDA is implementing things which will roll out more broadly in IoT devices, and you've got banking. Banking is trying to get more consolidated stuff together, and then you've got the airlines and transportation. TSA is rolling it out over there, and apparently the stuff they're asking them to do is so outdated, and they can't even believe that these people are pushing back. Like those guys are, I think someone brought it up in one of the rooms earlier, they're just a complete shit show. So it's really hard to have, and then legislation, obviously these guys are breaking laws. I mean, but who to go after? It's a super sensitive area, because are these guys state backed or not? It doesn't sound like these guys were. And if they're not state, they can go after them. If you move quickly enough, they can tend to get the ransomware back. I mean, they can actually track it if, through blockchain and other methods or through bank transfers. But if it's state backed, and then you dig into diplomacy issues, or, was it really state backed or not, et cetera, and how do you push back? So it's an extremely sensitive area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give me 2 seconds here. I'm just taking one of Evan's tweets that I'm going to share in a minute. So the next article is kind of a really interesting contextually to the conversation we've been having just a minute ago. And again, we don't pick the order, as Cheryl can confirm. The next one is the Washington Post. Says they have sources that, remember, we were just reading the article about how Facebook can't moderate the metaverse. Here's a separate article. Again, I don't pick the order of these top shared articles each day. Here it is. Washington Post. Racists and Taliban have flocked to Twitter's new audio service after executives ignored warnings. And the subheadline basically is that executives ignored warnings that Twitter lacks the ability to moderate Twitter Spaces, their version of Clubhouse, which we happen to be live in at the moment, and launched the product amid investor pressure. That's the story from the Washington Post from Elizabeth. Well, it's got, 1, 2, 3, 4 contributors on this one. That's quite a lot, actually. Earlier this year, as Twitter raced to roll out Spaces, its new live audio chat feature, some employees asked how the company planned to make sure the service didn't become a platform for hate speech, bullying, and calls for violence. Okay, so notice again, essentially the same article that we. Oh, hey, David Chang's in the Twitter room. Hey, David, let's get David on stage here. So we just read the article about how Facebook struggles with moderation because it's difficult to moderate a non-text experience that's happening in real time, like the metaverse is. Same like these rooms that we are in now. And so this one says this is not specific to any one app. This is doing content moderation of real time. Anything that's truly real time, like this room, is very difficult. It's an additional challenge when you're coming out of the text-based web that we just came out of. And I can tell you, China has figured out how to do this. They do it perfectly. They don't have these problems. You're not going to find articles about people saying or doing anything wrong in China's, even their live streaming apps, because they use facial recognition, and everyone who goes into the app must be thoroughly, triple, doubly, quadruply checked and verified with facial recognition. And if you do or say anything that the state doesn't like, not only will you disappear from the app, you might disappear from your home. That's one way to solve it. And that's how they've solved it in China. That is what's happening in China. So it's technically doable. The question is, how far between, a libertarian utopia of a lawless, metaverse and North Korea, where on that spectrum do we want to be? So this article says, in fact, there was no plan. And if you are a geek who's ever been part of a startup, you know that. Because your first order of business is making sure that people actually use it. And once people start actually using it, then we will start thinking about how, if problems arise, then we will deal with them. The problem today is nobody's using it. So let's focus on problem number one before we start solving problems that don't yet exist. And that's how startups work. That's how they've always worked. You don't start solving problems that don't exist yet. Donish, was that a hand up or a high five?
Yeah, that was a hand up. Tyler, one thing I will say is, are you calling Twitter a startup? Because that's fascinating. I feel like they're so far past it now. And one of the challenges, the thing that made this situation worse, so I wanted to give you some context. I was in Twitter Spaces just perusing rooms. And by the way, their hallway function is just not up to par. I thought Clubhouse was that, and it gave me a whole new appreciation for how good Clubhouse is in the hallway. But one thing I did notice is that there was a lot more, even than Clubhouse. And maybe it's because I have curated and said, hide this room enough that I don't see all those awful rooms in Clubhouse now. But on Twitter Spaces, there is an incredibly high amount of that. And you know that they had to have thought about it. They're a mature organization that's obviously public, that has hundreds and hundreds of engineers. It is a very challenging problem. I'm not discounting the problem, but it feels as though they didn't take that problem seriously at all. Because I walked into a room yesterday, virtually walked into a room, and it was essentially a a room of and I was just walking in because the title was provocative, which is how a lot of these clickbaity rooms are. But the room was essentially a front for people talking about violence in India and about doing violent acts in India against Muslims. And so again, that was just one room, but it was. I feel like I'm coming across that a lot more in Twitter Spaces, and it might just be, Tyler, that I haven't curated the rooms enough. But don't you think, Tyler, that Twitter knew that this was going to happen, and they could have done something to prevent it? I don't know what it is.
Maybe
I don't have the answers.
here's what I honestly think. I think they were watching Clubhouse very closely, and I think Clubhouse was generally quite very good at not, because of the way that Clubhouse started with the invites only, because of the invite only process. One thing that resulted in was a lack of buffoonery, because you're accountable not only to yourself but to the person who invited you. So the point is Clubhouse was notably quite pleasant pre-open to the public, right? Like remarkably so. And I think Twitter was watching that whole era very, very closely, and they didn't witness a whole lot of negative activities. And so when they were building their spaces, obviously directly inspired by Clubhouse, I think they perhaps had a false sense of security around the type of activities. And as soon as you have a public forum where there isn't identity verification, all hell breaks loose. And I precisely predicted that would happen in all apps. And I've given that rant here multiple times because when Jason and I were doing Mahalo and we did Mahalo Answers, and it was a closed invite only, and it was glorious and beautiful, and Elon Musk is there answering questions with, all the other tech Illuminati. And then we opened it to the public, and the next thing you know, it's an utter shit show. That's what happens. There's a lot of, hey, guess what, everybody? There's a lot of stupid people on the planet. Have you noticed this? Now, there's a headline that we need in the news every day. That should be the front story of every publication every day. And then that would give you the right context to understand the actual problem at play here is we have a whole lot of stupid mofos everywhere all the time. And guess what, Donish? I walked into a donut shop and there was some dudes talking about some really unsavory shit too. Should I call the police on the donut shop? Well, I don't know. But I mean, yes, that's unfortunate. There's people having conversations you don't like. By the way, I'm clicking on anybody's profile here in Twitter Spaces, and I have the option to remove that user from the room, report or remove, or block and remove. And I imagine everyone has the same. And that's what we have for today. And hopefully that improves. And until
to be fair to Twitter,
hold on, Evan. Yeah, you can. Let me make one final point. Generally, the way these things go, the point I was trying to make is, until there's an actual real problem, like a storming of the Capitol, then there isn't it's a resource constrained growth, and you're going to focus your resources where the real problems are. And there's plenty of fires to put out. And if the real fire comes out a result of a room, then there's going to be hell to pay. Of course. Sorry, go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's why Twitter created Birdwatch, which is running behind, as all Twitter services do. But if you go to @Birdwatch, you can sign up like I do to be a watcher, to basically, take a moderation role, and to leverage the power of the crowd. Birdwatch will give people the ability not just to report or block, but to actually intervene in discussions. So, yeah, I would encourage everyone to go to Birdwatch, sign up, and be part of the solution, not just observing from the cheap seats like we all do of all this content.
So, wait, is that how those groups attack people? Because I was always wondered how quickly people jump on something, and I wonder if they use Birdwatch for that.
Well, Birdwatch is new, and I don't suspect it's doing much yet, but you can sign up to be a bird watcher, and I think crowdsourced moderation is going to be pretty powerful. Like Reddit does a lot of that as well. as far as moderation. And it's not a panacea, but it definitely keeps a lid on some of the worst actors.
But Evan, one thing that Tyler just said, which was important, and I keep trying to think about, I don't know why, I have no money in the game for any of these platforms, but I keep trying to think about how would you moderate in real time as something is happening? Like, as somebody is completing, because it's easier in asynchronous, to your point. Like when somebody puts something out there, people can jump on it, they can get rid of it pretty quickly, they can put a message underneath it. But when someone's just speaking, like I'll tell you again, back to the room, the thing that was wild was they were talking about one specific topic, and they were talking about Bangladesh, and then as they were talking about it, suddenly one of the speakers started going down this road around, Muslims and all the bad stuff and all this stuff, and then suddenly slurs started coming out, and within like 5 minutes, all of the speakers started calling them camel jockeys and all this awful, just hateful, disgusting stuff. And then about 10 minutes later, they move back on. So then the question becomes, what do you in that moment, if you've got a young, impressionable mind who looks up to some of these people, one of them was actually someone who's notable, and suddenly starts using it in school and so on, you do have to start asking these questions around, what happened? Like, how do you actually moderate something in real time? Like, legitimately in real time.
Ken, I
And
can
this
actually
probably
answer
become
that.
a bigger
I
problem
can
than
answer that question for you.
Hold on. So Ken wants to respond to you. Donis,
Yes,
go ahead.
there's a way to do it. I don't think people would like the solution, and it's been used for years on television. You could have an audio delay so that a censor can bleep something out. They've done that on certain TV shows. They've even done it on certain award shows because there are celebrities who would sometimes, use certain words that the FCC wouldn't like. Okay, so the technology kind of exists if you want to live with a delay of the audio to allow someone to bleep something out.
Well, they do have that in Twitter. I mean, not intentionally, but there is a delay between the people on stage and the people in the room listening. There's about a 7-second delay that, if there was a moderator, could do a bit of that, perhaps. But as our friend Carl is choosing to participate via the DMs as he's listening to this conversation, and he's making some interesting points as usual, which I will share with you now, where he says that they do have live transcriptions, now just a matter of refining the NLP models, the machine learning, natural language processing models, which they're absolutely already doing. Only need a delay when the processing is underpowered. Yeah, I mean, he's not wrong.
Yeah, I think
I feel
there's
like
delays because of the.
Can't need
Sorry.
to jump on, but I've been thinking about this, and obviously we've been speaking about it for about 4 months, probably even longer, in like before Clubhouse even. But it's either a minority report, which is what the public are gonna call it, or it's total decentralization. And after these like series of conversations, or should I say like headlines, I've been leaning more to the decentralized model, because what would you rather, right? Would you have a centralized place that has all of your information, and if you say something slightly too like let's just say it was running on the this cancel culture model for 5 years, then a lot of people would be out of here just because of the way they speak, not because of what they said, but because of the way they speak and their tonations. All of those things will be out the window, especially with a computer generated model. And even if someone recanted, then or someone or the computer said, or a human moderator afterwards said, "Oh well, this wasn't that bad," the person still has that mark on them because of either they've been like blocked from the app for a certain amount of time, or unable to speak because the compute that's just the way that the model runs. It's like, we're going to stop you from running on this app for a while we figure this out. And that is really bad to me personally. Like anybody else, like some of us can say bad people will be bad people, but generally I like to say funny things that may be offensive, I don't know, but it just kind of lives like that, right? people live in their own echo chamber, and if the way that I speak to my people that are like from where I'm from that understand what I'm saying, and that is recorded in a public setting and it's in front of 3 billion people, then that is a totally different words. Those are totally different like intonations that I'm putting out there. But towards that, I don't know whether all of this moderation and NLP is gonna be able to function in the real world where it comes to how we actually speak, not the way that language is proposed, but the way people speak and the way language evolves.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slippery slope. I agree, but racial slurs, at least in the U.S., if you do, Tyler was giving that example of somebody can say something on the street, but technically, if I really wanted to, I could walk over to a police officer and say, that person's harassing me. Yeah. And it's actually, they can go to jail. They can get actual jail time around harassment and hate speech. And so there is something in the real world to do that, because otherwise, if people go completely unchecked, you're going to have, coordination, like the ones that we saw in Myanmar and other places, and you can start seeing that kind of stuff. So I think that, the answer is not North Korea or China, but the answer is also not libertarian heaven. It's somewhere in the middle, and I think it's a question that needs to be addressed, because we're sort of we can't be reactive on this one. I mean, okay. Tyler, that's my biggest fear, is that we're being so reactive.
Okay, so I want to do this. Because Twitter has a unique function. We've done votes many times in Clubhouse. We'll do it now in both apps simultaneously. Let's see what the results look like. Unfortunately for Clubhouse, we can only get the response from people on stage. In Twitter, everyone can raise their hand, I think. The little emoji down on the bottom of your screen where it looks like a little heart. Yes. Okay, so put up a hand, like a raise your hand, if you think that the way to address this fundamentally is identity verification for everybody involved. Like Dr. Donish just did. So you go down to the bottom of your screen, you click the heart, and then you pick the hand feature, which will raise your hand for you. So do that if you think you want identity verification. Nobody's doing that? No, only Donish? Donish, you're the only one who wants identity. So Evan wants it too. Okay. We got 2.
And Tyler, you can have Clubhouse audiences raise their hands and count the raised hands. Yep. You can do so.
That's right. Fair enough. Okay, well, we got 3 now in the Twitter space. And then if you're in the audience in Twitter, in Clubhouse, ask to be a speaker. That's what you do, right? You raise your hand to speak. So now we've got 11.
Correct.
Right. We've currently got 12, 13 out of 270. We've got 13. Wow. That's way less than I thought there would be. Way less.
That is absolutely shocking.
You see what the funny thing is, and like this is just interesting to me, right? Because I'm a very public person. Like I have my name on everything, right? But at the same time, I like my pseudo anonymity, and I feel like most people enjoy the anonymity. Like, and if they need to be seen, they will be seen by potentials who are going to look for them, right? But the reality is, a lot of people don't want a place that knows who they are all the time. Like we grew up in these systems, right? The governmental systems. But aside from that, there's no need for this extra layer of identification if I've already been identified, if you understand what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying.
Oh, go ahead, Don. Doctor.
No, Jason, I've been talking.
Well,
go ahead.
No, I appreciate it. No, I think what you just said, is spot on. Think about we talk about bias all the time. Imagine coming into a room and somebody, based on your profile, knows everything about you, assumes, they've had conversations with you before, and you don't get an opportunity to hear what people would say without already predetermining what they would say around you. Right? I think having
everyone.
What was that?
Adnan's mic is on.
I got him. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, but having the ability to hear a conversation without your predetermined, whatever gender, your color, where you're from, who you normally associate with. I like our statement about that. I think that the verification thing is great for eliminating. I don't know, probably the back channel DMs I get from all of the Charlize Therons that were in Clubhouse. But outside of that, I think it's not necessary. That's my opinion.
Okay, our friend Nicholas is listening somewhere. I don't see him in the audience, or is he in Clubhouse, or is he on Twitter? And Nicholas was saying, who decides, and who decides, and you're it's ultimately you're going to trade privacy for security. It's that classic old game, and tricky one. I'm just really surprised how few people were in favor of identity verification.
Tyler, it's baby. I would like to say, just like what Clubhouse, to let people register, you need your cell phone number. So in Taiwan, for example, or in China, for example, you need an ID to have a legit cell phone number. I think in the first place, that's how you are already verified with your ID. So that's why I don't vote for you need to provide your ID in this app. But I know in Twitter you don't need verify the cell phone number to do this. So I would like to the way Clubhouse do, because you are verified with another I would say national way to have this ID. So I would not to provide my ID to Twitter or Clubhouse directly. That's my reason for not to vote.
Okay, so should we now get into the tweets? We did all of the top stories, the big boring stories, but we have a whole ton of tweets to get through, like this one from Valerie Nielsen, that the United States Security Exchange Commission, the SEC, is looking at a whistleblower complaint about Tesla. Were Tesla solar panel fire risks properly disclosed by Tesla? I'm retweeting Valerie's tweet now to our nearly 7,000 Twitter followers of Tech News Around the World, TNATW. And Reuters says the U.S. securities regulator, SEC, has opened an investigation into Tesla over a whistleblower complaint that the company failed to properly notify its shareholders and the public of fire risks associated with solar panel system defects. Okay. Thank you for that one, Valerie. And Netta, you shared one from Daily Mail that China is building a 12,000 mile per hour hypersonic plane that can transport 10 passengers to anywhere in the world in an hour. And the 148-foot long plane is nearly a third longer or larger than a Boeing 737 and features delta wings similar to the Concorde. And Chinese officials aim to have a fleet of the aircrafts operational.
Tyler, might I add that this is from the Daily Mail?
Yes. Well, if that's something you know both the Chinese side and the Daily Mail side. So are you saying that this is likely not to happen?
I mean, this is probably the Daily Mail capturing some Chinese propaganda mouthpiece, okay, and then further exaggerating on top. I just don't think. So I know friends of mine who work for I think it's now an independent company, but it was formerly a subsidiary of Comac. Comac is the Chinese passenger plane manufacturing company, right? The state-owned company. And then she was so disappointed with how backwards the company is, not only technologically, but in terms of management and how they treat their own talent, that she left. And this is not from one singular source. This is multiple friends, right? So
you don't think Airbus and Boeing have much to worry about as far as selling into China. That was the big fear from Western manufacturers, was the rise of local homegrown airline competition, right?
I think they have no fears. It will be at least 20 years before China's commercial jets can catch up to the West. I mean, even if you look at COMAC's jets right now, the entire plane is a pieced together project of imported parts, engine, the skin, all of that, right? And I suppose part of it also has to do with the fact that there's so much fear of those in charge for a mishap that they just, as sad as this is to say, they actually don't trust domestic suppliers for most of the essential parts of the airplane.
Amazing. I mean, this is stuff you only hear on Tech News Around the World with Tyler and you and company. I mean, I've never seen that characterized. It's amazing.
Well, it's going to get more interesting because it looks like David and I might be meeting very soon here. I think that's a great DM thread we've got started now. Looks like we might be in the same city at the same time. That would be amazing. So the next article that Evan shared a few hours ago is about Bitcoin mining, which David happens to be incredibly informative about, to put it mildly. And it's specifically about I want to pin it to the top of the room. Cheryl, I pinned it to the top of the Clubhouse room. I'm hoping, and I just tweeted it to the Tech News Twitter account. Can you put it at the top of the Twitter space, please? So people can see this graph, because what it talks about is how Chinese Bitcoin mining, when China banned the Bitcoin mining in September 2021, where they were, according to this graph that you'll see in a second, they were doing about 75% of the Bitcoin mining. I thought it was a bit less, right? I thought it was like 55%, but David, I'll defer to David's expertise on this. And a year ago, the US was doing about 4.1% of crypto or Bitcoin mining specifically, and now that has jumped to 35%, which David himself plays a very interesting role in that. So I wonder if, there's the chart at the top of the Twitter space room and also at the top of the Clubhouse room. You can both see the graph for yourself, and it shows how that massive Bitcoin mining that used to happen in China has now gone elsewhere, mostly the US and Kazakhstan, which we've read those headlines about, but this graph is really beautifully done to kind of demonstrate it. And my question to David is, how accurate is this graph?
So to be honest, it's always very hard to tell the exact amount, and I think that the easiest way is to get an aggregate of all the mining pools, because only they will have real data from in terms of the IP and the location of where the hash rate is being contributed from. But obviously, because mining pools aren't regulated entities, so it's hard to get a real sense of that from them. But I do know intimately well, like the founders of F2 Pool and Poolin. So these are two of the largest pools in the world. And we do see significant drop off since the ban. But what's funny is within 3 months of the ban in China, the number of miners in China actually crept back significantly. And then if you look at sort of mining hash rate as an aggregate, as a global aggregate, it's certainly recovered significantly since May of this year, when the Chinese government first banned it. But that's why, starting last month, the Chinese government has made mining, crypto mining, not only a civil offense, but also a criminal offense now, to sort of further crack down on activities. And the reason why is a lot of these miners have elected to go deep into the mountains in southwest China, where they're very rich in hydropower. And because of the locations of the hydropower plants, it's also hard to track the usage because of the instability of hydro. So what happens is when the Chinese government commissions a hydropower plant to be built, let's say it yields 50 megawatts of power as a minimum, but can go up to 150 or 200. The power grid would only take what they consider to be the worst case load from that generator. So if it can generate, say, between 50 to 200, they would only sort of mark it as a 50 megawatt generation. So the crypto miners go into these places and then capture all of that delta. But because you're not operating a data center, you're just operating Bitcoin mining. It doesn't matter if you don't have 100% uptime. As long as they can get even, I guess, 85% uptime, they'd be very, very satisfied to get the operations. And then in the early days of the ban, certainly a lot of people moved over to Kazakhstan because it's literally right next door to Xinjiang, where a bulk of the crypto mining took place in China. But I think a lot of that number has come down for several reasons, right? And mainly amongst them is, as you know, these sort of former CIS countries are incredibly corrupt. And I've sent my own machines there as well. So they have this new rent-seeking policy coming up, which is basically granting, I think, only 5 licenses to sort of the vested interest groups within Kazakhstan. So they need not make any investment, have any knowledge in this field. As long as they hold the licenses, everyone who's going there from China must operate under their license and then pay them a tribute in effect, right? And then these are obviously all the cronies of the power be in that country. And then on top of which, there is actually a finite amount of power in Kazakhstan. So they're doing in the US, I think the numbers have gone up significantly, but I don't think I don't know if it's nearly as aggressive as people claim yet, because it does take quite a long time to build out a facility. So, for example, our own facility in Texas, it takes about 9 to 12 months to build out. So the only ones that can go operation very quickly in the US are conversions of industrial sites. But the downside of those is your power cost is actually very expensive, and in the long run, I think probably won't be very market competitive. So I think the chart trends in the right direction, but in terms of the actual numbers and nuances, it's just a very complex minefield to navigate.
Tyler, Donna here. Can I jump in a sec?
Please do.
Hi. I'm good, thanks. So the other thing I wanted to add is you see that in the U.S., which you don't see on the graph, you do see a lot of support in a number of different states, i.e., Texas, Colorado, Wyoming, to bring this in as a business. And you also see that on the floor of the Senate or in local governments within their own states, in supporting legislation that allows and encourages mining facilities in their state. Ted Cruz has been very supportive of this in Texas and continues to be very supportive of crypto in general and Bitcoin specifically in the Senate, and uses every opportunity now to be able to do that, not only because of his state of Texas, but he has, as a libertarian, now espoused the national security perspective on it. So I do think that you will see tensions between, again, Republican and Democratic states in the sense of who is promoting this as ways of bringing business and opportunity to their constituents.
Okay. So the next tweet I have a bunch of tweets, but one of them is China related. So while we have David here, who sent this in? And Jeannie sent this one in from the Wall Street Journal. And the article is about MIT. It's an opinion piece, and it asks the question, is MIT's research helping the Chinese military? It's written by Michelle Bethel. It says, my concerns about how Beijing might be using our findings at MIT were dismissed as racist and political. I was thrilled when I joined the board of MIT's Institute for Brain Research 7 years ago, but last week I resigned. I'm no longer confident that the Institute can ethically push the boundaries of science for the good of humanity while working with institutions beholden to the regime in China. Wow, those are some strong words. My stepfather, the late Patrick McGovern, founded the Institute in 2000 to foster knowledge of the human brain and cure diseases. He was a global pioneer who expanded the Institute's partnership with institutions in China during a more optimistic time in that country. I have real affection for China and its people. I moved to Shanghai with my husband in 2006. Over the next 7 years, I gave birth to 3 children there and learned the culture as well as the language. China's was different then. The government had, at least to a degree, gotten out of the way of its citizens enough that the country was thriving on the work ethic of its people and the desire to succeed. We saw striking changes. Skyscrapers went up, new highways were built, people catapulted themselves out of poverty into the modern world. But times have changed. The Communist Party has reasserted itself in every aspect of China's society, economic, social, cultural, and yes, scientific. Yet MIT and the McGovern Institute seem to have failed to scrutinize these developments. I believe that MIT doesn't have a firm grasp on events in China or the risks of partnerships with Chinese institutions in cutting-edge areas of science that are subject to misappropriation or abuse of military modernization or repression. Reuters recently published an article about a Chinese professor at a Danish university who collaborated with the Chinese researchers to investigate monkeys' brains at high altitudes. It concerned me because the professor followed the rules of the university as well as the laws of Denmark, yet his research might have aided the PLA, People's Liberation Army. By conducting research with institutions in China, McGovern Institute unwittingly could be aiding the country's repressive security apparatus or its military, whose officers have published articles declaring biology a new domain of warfare. The Chinese Communist Party, in pursuing what it calls military-civil fusion, has passed laws stating that all institutions, including those in partnership with Western universities, are obligated to serve the modernization of the Chinese military. This requirement and the party's opacity make it hard to ascertain if the PLA is using our research. I was concerned about the potential reputational damage to the institution that bears my stepfather's name. When I first aired these concerns a few years ago, other board members took offense. One said that any serious inquiry into the ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party would be racist. Another key member of the institute asked me to stick to science and not to mention China again. On reading the Reuters article last month, I raised my concerns again. Board members again dismissed the issue I cited, saying scientific progress is paramount. One characterized my motives as political, a head-scratcher, given that I don't wear my central political views on my sleeve. This week, the U.S. announced a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics, citing credible reports that the Chinese party is conducting genocide against Muslim Uyghurs in the Xinjiang province. These are serious accusations that the MIT should be concerned about, examining whether our research may be aiding the PLA and is neither political nor racist. Well, that's hot. That's a hot take right there.
I'm going to agree with that, just to point out that also tech companies don't seem to understand what happens, and the U.S. government has they don't regulate, but they have really tried to nudge these tech companies, and they have created certain hurdles, such as saying you can't do joint partnerships anymore. They're considered export if you do it under different regulation. So this is highly plausible.
Okay, so I mean, she seems to know more about China than the other board members, I would imagine, but maybe not. I mean, that's a pure assumption on my part.
Can I chime in here?
Yeah, well, I would be honored, David. Go ahead.
Having spent some time, quite a bit of time, I would say, in a pretty decent American engineering school at Stanford. I mean, if you go into Stanford High School or any of the top American engineering schools, like 90% of the students are either Chinese or Indians. So, when the overwhelming majority of the population are in these schools are of Chinese descent or are Chinese international students, it also makes it a lot easier for the Chinese government to poach them. So there's this organization in America called the Chinese Student and Scholar Association. They exist on every single American university campus. The president of these organizations report directly to the Chinese consulate, and they're funded directly by the Chinese consulate. So for them to have not pass information along is nearly impossible, right? On top of which, American universities are, as you know, extremely woke and liberal. And I think while at the one hand, sort of the general consensus on campus is to be very opening and inclusive of different nationalities, etc. On the other hand, you have a lack of opportunities for these international students, or at least the opportunity to integrate into the workforce. Right? So when I was at Stanford, it was sort of at the time at least, a last resort option for these Chinese students to go back and work in China. The preference was always to go to a top Fortune 500 tech company in America first. But I think because of visa-related issues and employment because of these visa-related issues, it makes it very hard for them to really stay in America and contribute to society there. So thinking about their own futures, clearly it's not hard to imagine that they would be more collaborative with the Chinese government or Chinese government actors, if that makes sense.
Yep. Thank you for that.
Tyler?
Yes.
Johnny here. I've had numerous Chinese students in my classes. And for example, if they choose to do a paper on CBDCs, they ask me privately if they could exclude any negative comments about the Chinese CBDC, because if they use email to send it to me, they're worried that it will be monitored. So we they have collaborated and and told me these honest things about the way in which they have to handle their papers or any submissions, because they believe that they're monitored all the time.
That's hot. That's a hot take. Thank you for that. And Katerina is raising her hand in the Twitter space. What's on your mind, Katerina? And this is, there we go. She's got her hand up. There you go. Welcome, Katerina.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, like, I was doing research at Stony Brook and then other universities, and a big chunk of real high-paying customers are foreign students because, at least in New York State, students in New York State at SUNY universities, for example, they pay way less than students that come from abroad. Students that come from abroad pay way more, and they are not on loans that are subsidized. So this is a really big customer base for universities. So there is this conflict of interest going on between what NIH regulations say, that it's very limited nowadays to do collaborations with China and other countries now. With NIH grants, you cannot send data abroad and so on. And there have been people even arrested because postdocs and students sent data that was generated in the US abroad after even they finished their postdoc or PhD student time. They took the data generated in the US abroad and continued working on it, and this is not allowed anymore. So there is this conflict of interest between universities that have paying customers from abroad and then NIH regulations and interest from the US government to not, bring basically the knowledge that was acquired here to other countries, and then being used in a way that's not within U.S. Regulations or ideology. So I just wanted to state that.
Okay. So other tweets that people are sharing that I'm retweeting is this one from RCC, that Mercedes-Benz gains approval to sell cars with hands-free driving capabilities. And retail CEOs say online marketplaces are fueling flash mob robberies. They want Congress to step in. A letter signed by the chief executives of Best Buy, Target, Nordstrom's, and other brands urged lawmakers to make it harder for people to do flash mob robberies. Okay. And the next one was from Thomas Tong from Gizmodo, that there's a study that says Investing in Legos will earn you more money than investing in gold. Economists have found that prices of retired Lego sets grow by 11% annually, which is higher than the average returns provided by gold and large stocks. And Thomas also has this one, that a first of its kind study shows plastic's toxic effects on human cells, with plastic waste turning up everywhere from Arctic snowfall to Antarctic sea ice and the world's tallest mountains in between. We're seeing more researchers shift their gaze towards the potential impacts on human health. The latest discovery in this space looks at the volume of plastics we're regularly consumed through food and water and how this might impact human cells, finding that the concentrations we are exposed to can potentially have toxic effects. Well, maybe we could finally unlock this whole autism riddle. It isn't the vaccines or the 5G towers after all. The body of knowledge around the ways plastics might influence our health is building rapidly in the back of research probing their effects on the human body. Much of this centers on plastics that is broken down into the ocean into tiny fragments known as microplastics, which studies have shown are consumed by marine creatures and can travel up the food chain. We also seen research demonstrating how microplastics can alter the shape of and decluster human lung cells and infiltrate the blood-brain barrier in mice. Studies have also suggested chemicals in plastics can cause alarming damage to brain cells. Found plastic particles in 93% of bottled water and in human stool samples collected all around the world. The latest study, led by scientists at the Hull York Medical School, is described as the first of its kind in that it explores how much plastic we are likely consuming and what the effects of those concentrations on human cells are. To do this, the scientists drew on 3 previous studies quantifying microplastic contamination in drinking water, seafood, and table salt, all of which found high levels of human exposure from consumption of these. They then compared these results to findings from toxicology studies on the effects of microplastic on human cells. Quote, "This is the first time scientists have attempted to quantify the effects of the level of microplastics on human cells using a statistical analysis of the available published studies," says lead author. Quote, "What we have found is that in toxicology tests, we are seeing reactions, including cell death and allergic reactions, as potential effects of ingesting or inhaling high levels of microplastics. These concentrations of microplastics were also found to impact on cell membrane and lead to oxidative stress, causing cellular tissue damage. Quote, "Our research shows that we are ingesting microplastics at the levels consistent with harmful effects on cells, which are in many cases the initiating event for health effects." Interestingly, the team found that the damage of microplastic particles can do might depend on its shape. Most of the toxicology studies so far have tested the effects of spherical microplastics, but the team found that those of an irregular form were particularly potent when it came to cell death. Quote, "Our analysis of the data showed that cell viability depends on the shape of the microplastics. Irregularly shaped microplastics, which are the majority found in the environment, are more hazardous than spherical. However, the biggest uncertainty at the present time is how ingested microplastics are excreted from the body. This is a crucial point to understand the true level of risk." Okay. I think the other issue is not even the plastics themselves, but the plastic softeners and PSAFs and phthalates, it turns out, might be far more damaging than people ever assumed. And we're seeing this you can't even find tribes in the Amazon that don't have this at this point. It's getting really out of hand. So thank you for that article. The next one is that young Latinos are dying of COVID at an alarming rate. As more people get vaccinated, pandemic restrictions lift, and the economy rebounds, the families of young Latinos who died will feel the loss for decades to come, not just the grief, but the long-term financial hardships. Okay. And Evan shares this one that, that's the same one, that the CEOs of Best Buy and Target and others, CVS and 20 other leading retailers calling on Congress to crack down on the surge of brazen thefts happening in the U.S. to deter criminals from reselling stolen merchandise. Particularly bad in the Bay Area.
Hey, Tyler, Cal actually put out something on his Twitter account about that. And I think I put out a public reply on that, which is it's not a federal issue. It's basically in the United States, most criminal laws, particularly for those types of activities, are state laws, sometimes municipal ordinances. So it's really not a federal issue. And if you look about where it's happening, it's mostly in cities, quite frankly, where they've changed the laws recently in regards to bail. So they're letting which has good reasons to do it also, but there are less people being incarcerated for small crimes, and in California in particular, I think there's a problem because I think if you steal goods below $1,000 now, they're treating it like a misdemeanor. So I mean, these are very local specific issues. I mean, you don't see stores being ripped off in Florida and Texas like you do in California.
Okay, and then you had an article that you tweeted about Bill Gates made a comment that most office meetings will take place in the metaverse within 3 years that I just retweeted. And here's another one that you had about gamer hate. Ubisoft's new NFT project gets 96% dislike ratio. Oh, that's sad to hear. A post calling on the community to boycott Ubisoft's new NFT project has more than 13,400 upvotes on Reddit, with users slamming it with a whole bunch of dislikes. Okay. And I think that pretty much takes us to the end of today's.
I did have one more I sent to you that I thought was actually important. That's why I privately back-channeled you hours ago. I don't think you covered it yet. But the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, some of it, the article is more about who's going to be responsible in the federal government. But the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency apparently is going to have responsibility for the whole federal government now in dealing with social media on certain things, but as it relates certainly to intelligence in issues, because they think there's a lot of stuff going on in social media, whether it's people running money laundering or trying to plan terrorist events or whatever. So there was a whole article that I sent you, to Tech News on the DIA, which doesn't get it's kind of like the CIA within the Defense Intelligence Agency. It's their intelligence agency within the Defense Department, basically taking the lead for the whole federal government on a lot of social media things now.
I just pinned it to the top of Clubhouse and retweeted it to the Tech News Twitter account. Anybody else with a hot one that we missed today or this week? Going once? Going twice?
Oh, yes. Biden did not consider Singapore as a democracy and is not invited to the summit.
Oh, Singapore was not welcome to Biden's democracy summit?
Yeah.
Oh.
Uncle Joe is not nice.
Oh. Oh, boy.
Oh boy.
Maybe he felt like he really wanted to do, a whole bunch of gum chewing, and he just thought it would be more.
What about Malaysia?
Suitable to kick them out.
He invited Malaysia. Malaysia. I can't believe this.
Did not invite Thailand. There's always next year.
I think that's because of you and Cheryl.
Yeah.
No, he needs to check his dictionary on democracy.
Okay.
But who needs a democracy in Thailand when you have a wonderful king who's just fabulous, beautiful?
I challenge you to say otherwise. If anyone.
Well, I'm not worried. You should be worried. Yeah. No, king is wonderful. Yeah, great guy. Long live the king.
Quite possibly the most handsome and thoughtful man to ever grace.
Right, and he's so well dressed. It's just style,
unbelievable,
and grace.
I can't think. I'm having I really can't think of anything negative to say about the guy.
I like Chris have a burner phone.
Yes, and you might want to have a burner phone if you start making comments like that. So join us next time. We take Sunday off, but Adonish and some of the MedTech folks traditionally do a MedTech room on Sunday. Is that the case for tomorrow?
Have news around the world, but it's not scheduled yet. So,
Okay, so
look at space.
Yes. So what you do
Watch
is
the
if you're in Clubhouse, follow the Tech News Club and myself, and if you're in Twitter, follow me on and the Tech News Twitter accounts, so that you can get updated when we do these rooms, as we do every day. And we're glad that you joined us for it. And thank you for another fun Tech News around the world. We'll see you next time. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.